Nigeria has had discussions and debates on electoral reforms as the OffCycle elections in Edo and Ondo draws closer, addressing various issues bedeviling the nation's electoral process, such as electronic voting, security and violence prevention, transparency and accountability of both INEC and the political parties, among other issues, remain paramount. To help us discuss these issues, we have Chima, public policy analyst and also an executive director, Africa's Morning Center for Public Policy and Good Governance. It's good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with a basic background on how we came to have off-cycle elections. So many of them now, but what was the genesis?
Well, it was as a result of judicial intervention in electoral processes. You remember that in 1999, we all had similar, or in some cases, the elections were happening at the same time. But then at some point, because of litigations arising from election petitions, both pre-election issues, election issues, and all of those things, and then you have consequential judicial pronouncements on elections. And the landmark was that of Anambra State, which involved P2B, who has stayed for almost 3 years in court defending or trying to reclaim his mandate that he alleged was stolen. And indeed, he convinced the court to agree with him that he was a rightful winner of the Anambra 2003 governorship elections in the state. But by then, someone who the court agreed was not the rightful winner had stayed for 2 years plus in the saddle. So he went back to that same court to argue that he was elected for a 4-year period and that his tenure could not have exhausted, having served for just a few out of the elected 4 years. And the court, in this case, the Supreme Court, agreed with him. And because they extended his tenure by 4 years, that began to find disaggregated election cycles, talking about governorship elections. So you found that anywhere a governorship election is obtained, especially midway or halfway into the incumbency of the person who was allegedly not the rightful winner, then you had that would, of course, affect the cycle of the election. So in Anambra, we now have a cycle that is outside of national cycle. You have that in Edo, you have that in Imo State, you have that in some other states in the Federation. Then the law is quite different when it comes to a National Assembly. A National Assembly, the term starts at a particular time and ends at a particular time. So even if you're able to reclaim your mandate 2 days before the end of the particular session of the National Assembly, you're only entitled to 2 days, right? But then you also see that we have, we will not call it off-cycle elections, but I don't know the appropriate term now. But you also see that there will be elections into vacant seats, into where, for instance, the courts have ordered for a rerun, the courts have ordered for supplementary elections, or that the person incumbent is deceased, or that the incumbent has accepted a ministerial nomination. So those are some of the reasons why you have disaggregated election cycles.
All right. I mean, you've raised so many issues already, and we've barely started the conversation. But before we get to that, look at the calls for, a review of off-cycle elections. I want you to, just before the festivities, the Christmas and the New Year, we had elections in Kogi State, and there's been, that was an off-cycle election as well. There's been a lot of talk about how the process was conducted, some of the issues that came up. I'd like you to start from there. Before we can talk of reforms, we need to know where we're going. So for you, as a policy analyst and a stakeholder in this country, what are some of the issues arising from not just the Kogi State election, but from the previous election? We also had an off-cycle election that we need to begin to look at.
Well, the fundamental issue is that of declining trust in the electoral process. If you go around interviewing citizens, especially younger participants in the electoral process, my generation, and you will find out that then the trust or the level of confidence people repose in our electoral systems is at an all-time low, especially after INEC had squandered, indeed, rather recklessly, the momentum that they garnered going up into the federal the February 25th general elections and then the governorship elections that followed, I think 3 or 4 weeks after. And with that, you heard that INEC had a lot of opportunity to indeed prove Nigerians wrong, because there are a lot of people who sat on the fence despite the electrifying campaign from all quarters, from the PDP, from the APC, and from the Labour Party. But despite all those electrifying campaigns, there are a lot of people who sat on the fence, who said, look, I'm not going to vote because my votes would not count. And indeed, it appeared that INEC proved them to be right, and that INEC had squandered the hopes and aspirations of many Nigerians who trusted in them to deliver a free, fair, and credible election. And then you know that the renewed hope, and I'm using that word advisedly, that people placed on INEC prior to the February 25th was as a result of introduction of tech, and then as a result of the preceding electoral reform that preceded the general election. So a lot of people expected that now that you have introduced tech into the equation, that it will take care of some of the usual complaints that people have, that it will take care of some of the lapses that people have witnessed in times past. But then that wasn't the case. And so you see that indeed INEC messed up in my own view. But then if you'd go deeper than that, and I keep making this point, I don't think people we have in positions of responsibility fully understand what people do when they vote. People don't just give you their ballots, people give you their lives. Take, for instance, the women in Bokos local government area, or in Mango local government area of Plateau State, or women in some communities in Southern Kaduna, or people in Benue, Plateau, and all of those places. When they come out to vote, they are looking at, look, after these elections, herdsmen, terrorists will attack us. And then in the middle of the night when they're setting our houses on fire, who is the commander-in-chief that will call and he will respond to us? And so when they vote with that in mind, that they are giving you their blood, they're giving you their lives, they're giving you their aspirations. And so what INEC was supposed to count is not mere ballot. INEC was counting the lives, the blood, and sacrifice of many Nigerians. And indeed, it was disappointing that INEC did not factor all of this into their operational modalities, that a lot of the things that we saw happening with the elections, talking about the failed technology, again, depending on who you ask, but then I don't think that the manner in which INEC conducted themselves leaves much to be desired.
All right, let's talk a bit about some of the irregularities, but I must highlight something that I hope we can put somewhere and engrave it. Politicians can have the mindset that people don't just give them their ballots, they're giving them their life. That's very deep. Thank you for it. Let's look at some of the irregularities that was observed. And one of them that was highlighted was ballot papers being filled up before the people even voted. And another was the bypassing of the beavers and uploading of results from polling units where no voter turned up. There are other issues as well. Vote buying was still seen in the recently concluded election. And then we have calls for review, of some of these issues that were raised. So from your perspective, these things are still happening. Is there something we can do? Are there loopholes that was noticed during the last election that we can use to address it in the upcoming polls in September and November?
Well, that of September and November, I am not exactly sure that we're able to cover those loopholes before those elections. But then if Nigerians insist, especially the major opposition platforms, I believe that we can reclaim some of the grounds before the next general elections. I'm talking about the 2027 elections, right? So yes, you highlighted some of the loopholes, and these things were noted before the elections. I don't know if I refer to some of the work our organization did prior the elections. We insisted that INEC and the stakeholders should subject the election management systems and processes to a multi-stakeholder audit test and integrity checks, right? And part of the reasons why we called for that was what you eventually saw on February 25th and then in the other elections that followed afterwards. Because what INEC is doing with Nigeria is what I call major national experimentation. They're just using us to do, we are almost like lab animals in this case. And I'll take you back to the era of smart card reader. INEC went into their proven and said, oh, we have gotten the smart card reader. And I remember them coming to the national television to say, oh, the smart card reader was the best thing that has happened to Nigeria since fried rice. But then because we did not subject the smart card reader to several internal checks, audits, and all of those things. We just jumped onto the field, and then here we are. We then found out that incident forms were the undoing of the smart card reader. So when they introduced systems like ABI, systems like Beavers, systems like IREV, and other systems, election management systems, and not just the systems, but the processes around the systems, our organization insisted that these systems and the processes around them must be subjected to multi-stakeholder audit review and integrity tests. There were some things we knew about the systems that were startling, and some of them were too bogus, not too bogus, but too weighty to come out and say publicly. And now that the elections are behind us, some of us then were at liberty to say. For instance, Festus Okoye, the National Commissioner in charge of voter education and publicity, I think, was going around telling Nigerians that they have acquired something they called ABIS, Automated Biometric Identification System. You will recall, and some of your listeners may recall, when they were saying, oh, the ABIS system is so automatic, it weeds out ghost voters, it weeds out your underage voters, it automatically cleans up the voter register, and a whole lot of other things that they promised around that. But you know that our inquiries, we found out that INEC does not have a single system anywhere. INEC does not have a single line of code. INEC does not have a simple smartphone or a mobile device or a laptop anywhere. Or
Chima,
even anything
is that actually factual? Because you're practically saying that the INEC chairman told blatant lies.
Yes, they can take up us with this. And we're actually saying it. And in fact, we knew this before the elections, but because of the high stake, we couldn't come out to publicly say it then, of course, because what could happen to whistleblowers in Nigeria. But then we communicated this in details. In fact, let's continue painting the picture, because what they actually did was that they gave Nigeria the details of Nigerians, the 93 million voter registers on the voter register. They gave it to a man that will leave unnamed for now. And the young man traveled to Israel and stayed for 2 weeks and came back with a hard drive and told INEC that they have used Israeli Mossad intelligence, whatever, to clean up the voter register. And that was the confidence INEC had in uploading the voter register of Nigerians on their website. And you will recall that Nigerians reported 55,000 fictitious names, underage voters, and all of those things. And INEC took that thing down and promised to clean up the voter register. Till today, that voter register is not clean. Even the 55,000 names that they said they removed, they did not remove it. And so there were a lot of inconsistencies we saw within the system that inspired our distrust for INEC. Before the elections, a lot of Nigerians are coming to learn these things after the elections. But some of us saw it before the elections, and we began to raise alarm. Unfortunately, people were carried out by the huge PR budget of this INEC. INEC has a huge PR budget. And again, the political parties were also tone deaf, because I don't know who told them that they've won already. And because of that, they didn't want to critique INEC systems, because they felt like critiquing INEC systems before the elections will water down the confidence of their supporters. And so because of that, they took an uninformed risk into walking into elections with untested systems, untested processes, and systems and processes that are vulnerable. And one of the major arguments we had then against the systems was that, look, we consulted with a professor of computer science. Her field is on human interaction with systems. And there is something called human interaction with systems, right? And so before you deploy any system, you must run some checks to see if human beings interact with these systems that I'm deploying, how does that affect them? Those are the questions. So you don't tell me that you have a foolproof device and then you come back later in the evening to tell me, oh, it is the human beings that use the devices. So because if you leave porous devices in the hands of individuals who may be coerced or induced to manipulate it, then February 25th is the outcome that you will see. So these things were indeed known and should have been known by political actors before the election. So now is not the time for intimidation.
Work like yours is in the public domain. We also have CSOs like the CDD, Center for Democracy and Development, and Yaga Africa, calling for a review of the entire process of the election that saw the emergence of the current elected governor of Kogi State. I want to ask, do you expect all these information that's been passed on to INEC, has there been a response from them? And do you expect that there will be some kind of review? Because this is not the first time that issues are being raised, and it seems INEC continues to ignore them.
Well, INEC is doing that because it feels it can afford to do so, and because it's banking on the assumed gullibility or lethargy of the Nigerian public. I remember in one of the cases that we raised, INEC used the official media handle Twitter handle to call for a Twitter space to dispel some of the facts that came out from the research work that we did. And I remember I was in my house one day and someone called me and said, oh, INEC is hosting a Twitter spaces. They are discussing some of the things you put out. And he invited me to hop on the space, and I hopped on the space. And then I saw, of course, INEC officials trying to gloss over some of the issues we raised. And the unfortunate thing they did then was to give me the microphone. And when they yielded the Twitter spaces to me, I was just speaking for 2 minutes or into the third minute, and INEC shut down the Twitter space and deleted the recording. And it's all there. We have screenshots and we have evidences of this because some of the facts we are bringing out were too consequential for them to defend. And they ran away from the space. And anytime you bring up these issues, INEC is like, now we're having this debate. INEC is hoping that Nigerians will not see it. INEC is hoping that Nigerians will not ask questions. INEC is hoping that everybody will just move on with their lives until they disappoint us yet again. Right? So I think that the problem now, of course, I blame people within the system for not placing emphasis on the task that has been given to them. But again, those of us who are the regular citizens, who INEC is counting these ballots on behalf, should have a more than a passive say as to how things turn out. But what you see is that a lot of Nigerians find it easy to move on with their lives. They don't pay attention to issues. And then even the opposition political platforms who are supposed to galvanize the citizens, who are supposed to mobilize
Chima, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry to do that, but I'm told we have less than 3 minutes. And there's one important question I'd like to raise here. You talked about the conditions for elections in the National Assembly, and you said that it doesn't matter when you go to court and come back, your role remains fixed. And then we had a situation where the former President, Goodluck Jonathan, made an appeal rather to the National Assembly, asking them to amend the 1999 Constitution to bring an end to off-cycle elections. Where are you on that conversation? Is it something that you think is possible to regularize the election so that the huge costs that comes from conducting these different elections will be minimized on the country?
Well, as to whether it's possible, I believe that it is possible. But then as to whether it will be beneficial or it will add anything or it will indeed improve the electoral outcome is what the literature is yet to be reviewed. And as of the time we are discussing this, we have not studied this long enough to have an informed opinion on the matter. But look, the problems with INEC and the electoral systems in Nigeria has more to do with operational, legal, and all of these frameworks rather than timing of the elections. Look, if you have a credible INEC and a credible electoral regime, whether you conduct elections 1 year after the general elections or 3 years after that, the results will still be the same. Nigerians will decide and their decisions will be respected. But then, so when you are calling for all these things to be lumped up and packed into one day, yes, we can decide that if that's what we want, but I don't see how that improves the system. Again, this is a half-baked opinion because we're here to study this in details, to do the cost-benefit analysis, to have an informed opinion on the issue.
Chima, it's been really lovely speaking with you. As always, I wish for more time, but thank you for the time you did give to us on Politics HQ.
Thank you so much for your time.